Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to the Knowledge Leadership, the Legal Hold and Preservation Maturity Model webinar. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature, which is located in the lower left corner of your screen. If you need to reach an operator at any time, please press the *0. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Thursday, March the 6th, 2014. I would now like to turn the conference over to Robin Thompson. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robin Thompson, and on behalf of all of our team here at BIA, we want to welcome you to the kickoff of our 2014 Knowledge Leadership webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about the new Legal Hold and Preservation Maturity Model. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to dispose of our housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please type those in the chat window, and Alon will get to those at the end of our presentation. As you exit today's program, you'll be prompted to answer a short survey. Your responses form the basis of our educational programs and help us to improve the solutions we provide to the industry. You'll also receive a thank you note from us that will contain information about how to receive the complete white paper on the Legal Hold Maturity Model. You can also write us at edu@biaprotect.com to get information on how to download that white paper and receive other helpful information on the proposed federal rules. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Alon Israely is a co-founding member of BIA and leads BIA's Strategic Partnership Program. He is a licensed attorney, an experienced and accomplished IT professional, and carries the distinction of a CISSP accreditation, which stands for Certified Information System Security Professional. For the last 15-plus years, he has advised corporations across the nation on best practices involving preservation and hold, and has been engaged to offer expert testimony in this area in several notable cases. The unique perspective he brings to his lectures has made him one of the most sought-after speakers in this field. Welcome, Alon.
Thank you, Robin. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're very excited about doing this webinar because many of us here at BIA have been working on this model for quite some time now. And we've just really excited about being able to publish it, share it with the public. We're going to be doing a number of things using the model in order to bring some more beef to it, in that we're going to get other people in the community, in the industry. We're going to have an open comment version of it. We're going to be able to have discussions. We're going to do roundtables. So we're very excited about that, and already have many people in the industry excited as well. I'm going to take some time giving kind of a description of what the model is and kind of the purpose of it. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the process at a high level and then go through the levels. Some of you may be familiar with this type of maturity model. It's nothing new. It's been in the IT and the IT security domain for many years, which is this type of framework. The ability to take a process, usually it's a business process or an IT process, and then overlay 5 stages to that process to see where an organization falls with respect to efficiency and workflow, quality assurance, that kind of thing. And so that's exactly what we've done. We've taken kind of the standard 5-level model, maturity model, but we've overlaid it to legal hold and preservation, which is more and more becoming critical business process inside of most corporations. Effectively, if you're a company that's involved in any kind of legal situation, primarily litigation, but really any legal situation which requires the preservation of documents and data, you find yourself in a position where you have to follow a particular process. That process is really a business process. It's normally owned by the legal department and involves several other parts of the organization in order to facilitate it as efficiently as possible. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that process is at a high level, what are the steps at a high level that an organization needs to take, and then we're going to walk through the different levels based on this maturity model. I do urge everyone to either send a note at any time during this webinar or right afterwards to, as Robin mentioned, edu@biaprotect.com, and we'll immediately put you on a list and get you out the white paper, the full version of the white paper, very quickly after this webinar. Otherwise, we are going to be sending some follow-on emails after this, and there will be some instructions as to how you can download it. But if it's something that you want right away, just go ahead and send an email to that address. But I urge you, once you get it, to read it. If, it's not too long. It's about maybe 15 pages or so, but it really does walk through in detail everything that we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be reviewing it, of course, at a high level today, but the paper itself will give you the nitty-gritty, so to speak. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by preservation, what we mean by legal hold and preservation. And really, at a very high level, it's everything that happens on CorpNet or behind the corporate firewall. Some of you may be familiar with the EDRM, which is a kind of industry standard model that follows the life cycle of litigation. So you can think about this in some sense very loosely as everything that occurs before data goes to your outside counsel, before data goes to the attorneys, the left side of the EDRM, so to speak. It's identifying information, documents, data, gathering that, meaning ensuring you have a preserved copy, notifying people of their obligations to retain documents, ensuring that IT understands those obligations and they suspend certain practices. All of those things together, and I'll walk through them in a little bit more here, is really what forms the basis of that business process, which is legal hold and preservation. Now, I want to be clear that we are just talking about what happens really for that part of the process, preservation. This is not an e-discovery maturity model. This does not talk about some of the things that happen past the data leaving the organization and going to the outside counsel. This is really focused on those activities that occur before the data goes to review, before the data goes to your lawyers. And many times, this business process, legal hold and preservation, occurs without necessarily the data following to attorneys or something like that. Meaning there are situations where the corporation just needs to put in place preservation in anticipation that there may be a legal matter, but that legal matter never arises. Either something gets settled or it doesn't turn out to be anything real. But the process itself of ensuring that people are told of their obligation to retain documents, that data is set aside or preserved in such a way to ensure it does not get destroyed, that part of the is very important regardless of whether there's actual litigation or not. And so one of the things we find with our users is that many times you have bunch of legal holds and preservation processes or activities initiated and managed, even though the case actually never goes as far as litigation or even as far as discovery. So at the bottom, that's the EDRM there. It's a little bit blurry and somewhat cut up. But again, just to kind of bring that point home, broadly defined, preservation is really notifying people, identifying data, ensuring those IT tasks are suspended, and ensuring that you're defensively gathering the data or securing it. So let's go into those steps a little bit in more detail. And again, this is mostly background for looking at the maturity model and understanding where you fall in that maturity spectrum. And so what are the steps to be taken? It's what I've just described. First, we got to tell employees not to delete. Make sure that they are on notice, they understand what it is they need to retain, and so that goes for the types of documents, the types of content, the information. we are finding today courts are more interested and happier when parties are ensuring that that notification happens as early as possible and that it happens in as much of a plain English or clarified way. So not as much legalese, a clear understanding of what employees must retain based both on the substantive aspects of the document as well as potentially the dates, to what it's related in the organization, that kind of thing. And really, this kind of graphic on the right, that's really what it's all about. It's ensuring that you're not deleting something. It's ensuring that your $1,500 an hour corner office law firm partner 8 months later is not complaining that there are emails missing or certain documents are not quite what they should be. So at the end of the day, this is really about making sure you have that in place. And you'll see that the maturity model helps you get there in an efficient and cost-effective and defensible way. Because really that's what the maturity model is about. It's not about specifically giving you the right steps that you need to take. It's about ensuring that the steps you're taking are done in such a way that they're defensible, efficient, and at a low cost, costing the corporation as little as possible. So once you've told people what to do, you have to ensure that those automated IT tasks are managed properly. There's a lot of automated IT tasks that occur on the back end. Everything from backing up certain areas of the system or the network every night to ensuring that people's email accounts are not being bloated, to ensuring that certain documents are either being destroyed or being maintained based on records management and other rules. So there's a lot going on the back end, and those automated IT tasks are usually managed from a number of different arenas, either compliance or risk management or legal. And so the coordination with IT to ensure that some tasks that relate to the data, specifically relating to destruction of data, are either suspended or managed. You don't always have to suspend them. You know, depending upon the situation, we are under a reasonableness standard. That's the standard of law we're using with respect to determining whether certain IT tasks should have been or should not have been suspended. And so, for example, some critical transactional system that may not be directly related to a case, their courts may have a hard time forcing the suspension of something like that, whereas the logs or the audit trails to a system like that may have to be preserved. And I can go through a ton of examples, but the point here is that most likely there are some automated IT tasks in play right now. At the very least, it's going to be probably email retention rules that should be managed and most likely suspended with respect at least to those custodians or those employees that are affected by the hold. And of course, you want to make sure you gather the stuff. You want to make sure that later on there are no questions with respect to where is the data, why is it gone. And so really what that comes down to is that combination of trusting your employees that they will not delete, as well as ensuring that automatic deletion, the IT tasks don't make that happen. And then to be safe, it's ensuring you have a copy set aside. In today's modern corporate environment with a lot of moving parts with respect to IT and systems and data, it is not a best practice to just rely on employees not deleting or the IT tasks being suspended. You actually have to take the third step of doing something to gather certain documents, do a snapshot, do a defensible copy of the data and set it aside, have systems that don't allow for the files to be deleted, although that's not one of my favorite ways of doing it. Regardless of how you ensure that the files, the emails, the data sets are retained so that later on you can say, yes, we have a copy of this stuff. Regardless of how you do it, that's an important part. And that you'll see as we walk through the maturity model and the different levels starts to get tricky. Because notifying people, you know, that's not brain science. There's a relatively easy ways to do that, whether it's manually or automated. You send some emails, you make sure you track those responses. Ensuring IT suspends certain tasks, that's not brain science. You got to have good coordination, good communication, but ultimately suspending some of those tasks, at least on base systems like email and document management systems, usually flipping a few bits, not difficult. Whereas preserving information, actually gathering documents, that starts to get more tricky. It's not a good practice to have your employees do it on their own. It's not good to say to them, hey, just drag and drop the stuff over here. There's potential spoliation in that. There's the alteration of certain metadata fields and information about where the document was originally stored. So you really don't want to do a drag and drop type data gathering or preservation. And so because that's kind of out the window, what happens is you have to rely on either systems or you have to rely on IT in a coordinated, formalized effort. And so that takes planning, that takes practice, processes, procedures, those kind of things. So to the extent you'll see in the maturity model that you can automate this part of it, the preservation part, actually gathering or setting aside copies of the data, this gets you very far. And there are a number of ways that you can do that in a relatively seamless and cost-effective manner these days. And we'll talk about that as we move through the levels. So what if you don't do any of this stuff? Big deal. Why should we run these processes? Well, we all know that it's about risk. And frankly, much of this model is about not only gaining maturity from a process efficiency perspective, but it very much is driven by risk mitigation. And the more you have a mature process in place, the more risk you're mitigating and the less costs you have, not only in facilitating the process, but also in the potential ramifications for not, such as fines and fees and sanctions. I think that many of you may think, well, how many times are we really going to get sanctioned? It does happen. But beyond that, there are a lot of costs at play that may not be related to a punitive level of action. They may just be related to inefficiency, the back and forth between the corporation and outside counsel. All of that back and forth, all of those extra steps take time and therefore money. So there are risk mitigation from ensuring that the company is protected, but there's also risk mitigation with respect to costs. And these are just some examples of case law, of cases where non-compliance with legal holder preservation resulted in sanctions or worse. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but you see there are several key cases and a ton more. And we, in fact, have a document that lists all the case law, or a good amount of it at least. And again, to the extent you'd like a copy of that, I think you can download that today off of our educational area of our website. But if not, again, just send an email to edu@biaprotect.com, and we'll make sure to get you a copy of that case law as well. And of course, spoliation or adverse inferences, some of the worst sanctions that you can get next to dismissal. So quickly, a little bit about the notion of why this stuff has to be done correctly. Why can't you just use drag and drop? Why can't you do other things? And that's primarily because of this notion of garbage in, garbage out. And it's because you have both legal liability issues, which we're looking at here at this slide, some of the risks of not preserving documents and data in the right manner. And then, and these are the legal risks, so to speak. And then, of course, the money risks. A deficient data preservation process definitely brings up the cost. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to reduce the overall legal spend. We want to reduce the overall legal spend while still maintaining a reasonable level of diligence and defensibility. So those are the reasons. You don't want to get banged with a fine with a sanction, and you want to make sure your costs are reasonable and at manageable levels. All right, so let's look at the model itself. And this is, again, a part of the white paper, but this is a table that walks through the different levels of the model. And it starts with ad hoc and chaotic, which, again, is very much following along the lines of the traditional maturity model, and then taking you all the way up to the top level, the most mature, number 5, which is integrated and optimizing. And we'll talk about what each of those means in more detail, and of course the paper itself gets into that. But if we just take some time here to look at this chart, this gives you a good sense of where we're going and what this model is supposed to represent. And so the first level, kind of the least mature level, and in some sense you can think of kind of 1 being an F and 5 being an A if you were to think about it in terms of grading. But 1 is we really don't have anything. Something occurs, there's a litigation or a regulatory investigation, and at that moment the organization has to figure out what has to happen. And so very much a messy way of acting. You have individuals that are each doing their own thing. You have the legal department trying to manage it, but not in any formalized way. It's the costs are high because you have a lot of unnecessary human time spent, a lot of wasted efforts. It's very hard to track, and it doesn't put you in any real good position from a defensibility perspective, because many months later, having to go back and show the steps taken will be very difficult, and in fact could potentially just add more doubt to the mix. So that level 1 is really where nobody wants to be. And if you think you're at that level after reading the paper and it describes, it gives examples of this. If you're doing this, likely you're in level 1. And so if you read it and you find you are in level 1, you have to really bring that up as one of the highest priorities at the legal department or the IT department, and at least get yourself to a level 2. My personal opinion is if you're at level 3, then you're already in a pretty good place. If you can get to level 4, you're in an awesome place, and if you get to level 5, you're almost untouchable with respect to someone being able to break some of your processes. And so that level 1 is really just a mess. It's very chaotic. It's kind of do whatever you got to do just to get it done. Level 2 is a little bit better in that you at least have some repeatability. You have a documented process, or at least lightly documented process. The overall mechanics of the process are incredibly manual, but at least you have a plan in place and you're trying your best to manage that. Of course, the costs are still unexpected. You may have some overruns. You're going to spend more people time than you need. You're going to potentially have to rely more on outside counsel for certain things or other vendors, and so the costs will be higher, but definitely not as high as level 1, and at least you are on track to being more organized. Level 3 is where you have a standardized process. This is something that is well documented. It's potentially something that gets trained as new people come on board to the particular departments that are associated with it, say primarily legal, but it is still mostly manual. Maybe some parts of it are not, such as the legal hold notification. Maybe there's some automation there, but primarily suspending IT tasks and definitely gathering or preserving documents and data are all very much manual. And so with every time you have a manual process, there's more moving parts, there's more requirements for ensuring that you're tracking correctly and all of that. So the costs are controlled, but there's definitely waste, especially when you have litigation that are not kind of in the normal course. You have a lot of HR every year, and then all of a sudden you have 1 or 2 larger cases. Level 4 is semi-automated, but very much managed. So there's formal documented processes. A good part of the actual mechanics of the different parts of the process are automated or semi-automated, where 80% of it is automated and a person only has to get involved in a few parts of it. Primarily, the lower hanging fruits part of the process, such as notifying employees and acknowledging that. That is being run in a automated manner, or many times a fully automated manner, maybe using software or in-house workflows that have been built. And there you have a very well managed process. You've got increased efficiencies because you have a good amount of automation. You've got defensibility. There are still requirements in that there are personnel requirements. Sometimes they have to be dedicated. There is more operational support from IT than is needed, say, with the next level, the highest level, in that IT still has to be available in order to do certain things, primarily, say, around the preservation side or the data collection, gathering side of things. But all in all, you're in a very good place at a level 4. And in fact, even some of the task suspension activities and even parts of the collection activity could be somewhat automated. And then, of course, the top level, level 5, which in many maturity models is like a theoretical level. There's some maturity models around IT and IT security where level 5 is like almost nobody gets to. But from our perspective, with this, we want to make the entire model practical. And so for us, level 5 is actually very much a place that many companies can get to. And it doesn't necessarily require a lot of money spent on software and other things. But level 5 means that you've maximized your efficiencies, your processes are really efficient, you have a very high bar on defensibility, and you have the lowest cost possible. And those costs are usually in the right model. They're fixed, they're predictable, they fit well into the budget. But primarily here at level 5, you have a legal department that's managing the processes mostly in-house and primarily driven or relied upon. Software is being relied upon to make that happen. Automated processes are in place at every level, the notification and tracking and acknowledgement level, the task suspension level, as well as the gathering level. There may still be some manual parts here and there, but they're usually edge cases or just in order to ensure an additional level of quality. Otherwise, mostly it's automated. And then primarily a real differentiator from level 5 to level 4 is that the legal hold and preservation process is integrated into other processes of the company and other systems. And so, for example, you might have a software that runs your legal hold notification and acknowledgement, and that also talks to other systems in order to set flags or in order to pull information to minimize double entry and those kind of things. So really much that integrated aspect of it is both at a process level and a system level in order to create efficiencies and reduce errors. So that's my walking through the different levels with some summary around each one. Again, most of this detail is going to be very much apparent in the white paper. I know most of you are busy professionals, and probably the last thing you want to do is read another 15-page paper or something. But to the extent you're willing to set aside 30 minutes to do so, I really think it would help, especially if these are things that are on the radar at your organization and you want to start to pursue or create initiatives around. In fact, we find that in some cases you could pretty much use this white paper as a recipe book for what you need to do in order to get to the desired maturity level. And I urge you, at the very least, everybody should focus on at least getting to 3. I mean, if you're an organization with at least a few hundred employees, if not more, and at least a few $100 million in revenue, if not more, then really there is no excuse to get to a minimum of level 3. So let's go in a little bit more detail through the 5 levels. Level 1 we said is ad hoc and chaotic. Level 2, repeatable yet highly manual. Level 3, standardized process, although primarily manual, so you still have people involved. Level 4, you've automated a good amount of those processes and you have it well managed and well documented. And level 5 is, of course, completely high level of process efficiency, high level of defensibility, integrated and optimizing throughout. And by optimizing, it also includes going back and revisiting these processes, maybe once a year, twice a year, with the right folks. Maybe it's a committee made up of representatives from different critical departments that are constantly looking at these processes and focusing on how they can optimize them even more. So when something is chaotic, when something is ad hoc, it tends to lead to a lot of stress, especially if we're talking about a corporate business process. And these images really represent what we feel like as the staff or the personnel that has to effectuate a legal hold and preservation process without having anything formalized, without having anything documented. The problem is that one time it may be one paralegal, another time it may be another person, another time it may be someone in IT. Case number 4 is different from what you did in case number 2, and the stories continue. And so really, you don't ever want to be in this situation. To the extent anybody on this webinar is in this situation, send me an email, and I will personally walk through how to get you at least to level 2 with almost no money spent or very little effort. It's that bad to be at a level 1. It's really intended to show the beginning of the model, but also to ensure that you are not ever at that level. In fact, today, startups even, especially kind of smarter startups, are already putting in place systems to make it so that they immediately can skip to level 3. And so this is not about the maturity of the organization or the age of the organization or the size of the organization. This is about what is important to you with respect to being organized around your legal responsibilities, regardless of how big you are. Because if you want to grow and you want to succeed, you will get to a point where you need to have formal processes. So again, I can't emphasize it enough. This is not a level that anyone should ever be at. It's just a lot of money and a lot of frustration and potentially a lot of legal expenses or even fines later on. And what I have found is that most organizations that are at a level 1 or maybe kind of between a level 1 and a level 2 are organizations that have the perception that they don't really have much going on. Oh, well, we only have 2 or 3 HR matters a year and maybe 1 contract dispute. So we don't really need to do any of this stuff. But the thing is that it doesn't really require much effort and definitely no real commercial software or hard cost spend to get to at least a level 2, if not a level 3. And so really, if someone says, well, we don't really have that much to justify it, and so we're okay being at a level 1, so to speak, I don't subscribe to that, and I do my best to convince them that being at a level 1 just costs you more and just creates more problems, regardless of whether you have 1 case a year or 10 cases a year. So level 2, how do we get from really the worst, the place you just don't ever want to be at least a little bit of a better level, somewhere where you can kind of start to defend the process? That's level 2, which is really about repeatability. It's about having processes, documented processes, maybe even some amount of training so that the same steps are taken every time. The nice thing about legal hold and preservation is that regardless of the merits of the case or the issues in the case, the process to notify people and to preserve data and to suspend IT tasks is all the same. Those processes are agnostic with respect to the subject matter of the case. And so you really want to have some documented processes that anyone in the organization, or really anyone who's driving this process, so primarily people in the legal department and or IT, can follow the right recipe, can follow the right formula. So really it's just as simple as ensuring that you have those in place. But it's highly manual, so you're still doing a lot of stuff using people. And so, for example, a repeatable but highly manual legal hold notification process may include having some spreadsheets that are the same spreadsheets used every time, so they have a template aspect to them, and using email in order to notify employees, but it's a manual process in that you go into the email, you copy out the person's name and email address, you put it into the spreadsheet, you check off the column that you've done that step, then you go and you create the email, you then send the email, you ask people to reply to that email in a manual way. When you receive those replies, you then stick them in a folder, plus you go back to your spreadsheet spreadsheet and you check off that box. So the processes are manual. The mechanics of the processes are manual, but at least they're documented. And that's better than nothing. Of course, the more manual something is, then the more time you spend, the potentially more frustrations there are. Maybe you miss things. We tend to fat finger things. We potentially have things fall through the cracks. And so, though it's highly manual, it's still going to cost more money and cost more time, and it's going to take more people. And so, this is better than level 1, but again, if you can, you really want to try to get at the very least to level 3. And the nice thing about this paper, as you read through it and you kind of start to think about how the processes work inside your own organization, you'll find that you don't have to go from one level to another. You could be at a level 2 and move up to a level 4 simply by instituting some software and putting in place some training and some formalized processes. And the same is true with different levels. The point is you don't have to go from one or another. You can skip levels. And in the case where you're at a 1 or a 2, you might think very much about if you're already going to take do the initiative and take the effort to do so, you might want to go to a level not just 1 above, but even 2 above. So level 2 is okay. It's not bad. At least you've got a plan in place and you're managing that plan and you have some documentation, but keep in mind what you're not gaining necessarily here is any real process efficiency. So you're going to have potentially more costs than you'd like. So level 3. Level 3 is really making it standardized, creating formality, getting executive sponsorship, putting in place those policies and processes, adding them to employee manuals and training, ensuring that you have formalized documents that you review and that you update as needed, making sure that you have knowledgeable individuals around who can manage that process, having in place maybe some automation, but mostly the mechanics of the process are still manual. But again, that notion of standardization is key. You want to make sure that you have taken a process that is a business process and you formalized it and made it officially one, so that there is now budgets allocated to it, there's time, there's training, there's all these things that you want to allocate to a truly standardized process. But it's still manual, so there's still things that you're going to have to do, meaning the mechanics. And so maybe it's not necessarily the notification and acknowledgement side of legal hold, maybe it's in the IT task suspension side. So maybe the email, maybe the legal hold notification is automated because you've purchased software around that, but when it comes to having to do the task suspension, well, that task suspension is going to be still manual. So maybe an IT ticket goes to, maybe a ticket goes to the IT department, but then IT is going to do those tasks in a manual manner. And then very much preservation still is done in a manual manner in level 3, meaning the gathering of documents. Maybe you make IT do that using some amount of workflow or tools, but primarily, again, manual. So that's okay. Again, it just means more people. You're going to have some amount of controlled costs because you've automated some parts of it and you have it standardized so anyone can pick it up at any time. So you have a lower cost of training and other things. Employees are more knowledgeable about the process overall, but there's still some room there for making more efficient processes by automation and even creating more defensibility. And at the bottom here you see kind of the importance of standardization. These are just some examples from real life, some of them on the technical side and some of them just, you can imagine if we didn't have standards, what would air travel be like today, or what would be, what would foodstuffs and healthcare be. So obviously we have a lot of smart people on this webinar. You don't need to understand what standardization is, but kind of taken to that internal corporate level, it really just means having in place processes that are well documented, that are formalized, and that have that sponsorship at an executive level behind them, and that will help create efficiencies around the mechanics, which you see here are still relatively manual. So level 4, starting to really automate the mechanics of those processes and then having a fully managed system in place, meaning something, a workflow in a system that ultimately all parts of it are managed. Whether that's managed in a manual manner or an automated manner, there's formal documentation, there's formal processes, there's cyclical review, there's all those things that are required in a fully managed process. And so you might have solutions in place or software systems in place to help automate this stuff with people who are doing QA activities or who are doing some parts of the process that were either too expensive or not viable to automate. But ultimately, it's this combination of a lot of automated processes with human QA and a well-managed overall process and procedure. So you have a manual and you have individuals that are allocated to do all the different things. They're well trained. And this is very much also about ensuring that the rest of the organization understands this whole legal hold and preservation thing. And a regular employee is indeed affected by this because potentially that regular employee may retain certain documents or data that are relevant, and so they are going to be touched at a legal hold level, at a preservation level. It's going to be important that the employees understand this, and part of being at level 4 is having a knowledgeable workforce, them understanding at the employee level that these are important and critical business processes. And then, of course, the top level, level 5, integrated and optimized. Everything is nice and well organized. A lot of it is automated, and it is really where you want to be. It's not hard to get here. It doesn't cost a lot of money. I think there's a perception that to get to a level 5 around legal hold and preservation, to make sure that you have all the systems talking to each other and all the parts of the process automated that should be, and very little bit amount of manual work and a high bar of defensibility. I think a lot of people tend to think that that's almost impossible to get to, or if it is, it's going to cost a ton of money. I've heard people say, oh, that's something that maybe the Fortune 10s need to do, but we don't need to worry about that. In fact, it's much harder for the Fortune 10s to do that because they have a lot more systems to integrate, and they have a lot more moving parts, and usually many more facilities, locations, data sources, and employees. And so frankly, if you're a $1, $2, $3, $5 billion organization, it's probably a lot easier for you and a lot cheaper for you to be able to get to a level 5. And once you've gotten there, it's actually really nice because there's so many things you don't have to do now. All you really have to do at this point is ensure that you're following the process, that it's running relatively smoothly, and that you're kind of revisiting it once a year or twice a year in order to ensure that it's still in line with the business strategies and everything that has to happen with respect to your industry, your particular organization. And so this is not hard to get here. It really, more than anything else, requires intent. One of the things that we see a lot is that organizations, they kind of get to maybe a level 2 or level 3. They're not necessarily happy with that because they have a relatively good amount of litigation, and they know that even one situation can effectively cost more than having done this right at a more expensive level. And so they know that they want to get to a better place, but really it's what I call the who moved my cheese problem. It's just an attitude issue. It's easier to not do anything than to make some changes, and so it's fear of change. It's presumptions that it's going to be a lot of heavy lifting in order to get the organization to agree that this is something that needs to be done. But I urge you to think out of the box and talk to me or talk to any of the folks at BIA. We could tell you that it's actually quite easy to get to a level 5. It really doesn't take more than intent, than really wanting to get it done. You bring IT into the mix, you bring legal into the mix, maybe the RIM folks, and in a very short order, in less than a few weeks, you can be at a level 5 and of course be in a highly defensible position, have the lowest cost possible around this business process, and have more time to do real work as opposed to a lot of the clerical work that ultimately arises from this process. Because so much of the legal hold and preservation process, really the devils are in the details, and it's really about the mechanics of the process, and that's where the efficiencies start to come down, is when the more manual logistics you have involved, the harder and the more time and the more money it takes to facilitate this stuff. So I urge you, and I don't want necessarily for you to deep dive right into level 5, but I urge you, if you're willing to take a look at what you're doing in your organization today, you might see you're already at a level 3. To get to a level 5 is quite simple, costs very little money, and it's really about someone deciding, I'm going to take the reins on this, I'm going to champion this, and in like I said, less than a few weeks, you can have it in place and running and smoothly and making everybody happier. So I'll just kind of finish with summarizing the 5 levels, showing you this chart again, and kind of giving you a sense. This is, again, a high-level sense, and mostly my opinion, which is these letter grades. 3 kind of gets you to C+, so you're above passing, and you're pretty good, but not awesome. Level 4, you're at the A-, B+, depending kind of what you're doing in level 4, which really is what I tell our customers and our users, say, to the extent you can, focus on getting to that level. And then, of course, to the extent you can get to level 5, you're A+ or an A student, and everybody's looking to you. And then what happens is you end up driving as opposed to being driven. So you're in a litigation situation, you are the party that's driving discovery because you are organized and you have already done your diligence and you have already done things that need to be done, especially with the new rules. I think we're going to be doing a webinar sometime soon, maybe next month, around the proposed new rules to the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. And there are a number of rules, but specifically there are some that focus specifically on legal hold and preservation. And so if you didn't have a motivation before to get some of this stuff figured out and more standardized inside your organization, then hopefully the new rules or will force you into that and at least give you some sense that, hey, we better take a look at this stuff, because soon your lawyers are going to be required to talk about this stuff early on. And so you want to be able to have that happen in a very low-cost manner, meaning hand over to your lawyer a report that says this is exactly what we do, here's how we do it, here's who's on hold, when they were put on hold, all this other stuff that you're going to have to talk about if these rules go through. And so to the extent you're at a level 4 or level 5, then in my mind, you're immediately compliant with those parts of the new rules. So with that, I will open it up for questions. I have kind of seen the side of my eye here that there's a bunch of questions that have been coming through the chat. So with that, Robin, I'll turn it over to you if you want to start serving some up, and I'll do my best to answer them. I know we only have a few more minutes here. And then, like I said, to the extent anyone has a question that they'd like to ask that I don't get to, or they just want to have a discussion around the maturity levels, if you want to read it first and then have a discussion, I'm happy to do that. I think we have close to 200 folks on the webinar today, and if I'll be happy to sit with each one of you and go through this in more detail, because we're really serious about trying to get this out there. This is not just a BIA thing. This is something that we hope the industry really kind of takes a look at and backs, because there needs to be something to go to in order to figure out where you fall on the scale. There isn't that today for preservation and legal hold, and so this is kind of the first thing of that sort that will help you through it. And so we encourage everyone to read it and to really think about it in terms of where your organization is. So with that, Robin, if there are any questions, go ahead and shoot.
Alon, we did get several in, and some of them I'm going to combine them. We had a couple of questions that asked why, you may have answered it, why was the maturity model created and who owns it?
Well, primarily the maturity model was created because so many of the people that we talk to every day were trying to figure out where they were. And they weren't necessarily talking in terms of these levels, but they would ask questions that in our mind would always come down to. We would actually had internal charts and ways of kind of measuring where someone was. I mean, let's be frank, we're a company that's a profitable company that sells software in this space. So it's very important for us to ensure that we're talking to the right people, and if we are talking to people, that there's something that we can do to add value. And so it was very important for us to get an understanding of where they are, where they fit on the overall spectrum. So we used this as an internal tool in order to figure out, oh, you know, this organization may be right for this kind of installation of our software, and this organization may be right for something else. And so we said, you know, it would be really nice if organizations can figure this stuff out on their own. They can look at something that is relatively objective. And I'll mention that nothing in the paper talks about BIAs, software, or services, or anything like that. We've been very careful to neutralize it because we really want this to be a standard that people can follow regardless of who you're buying your software or your solutions from. So really it's about giving the organization a very easy and quick and accurate tool in order to use to determine where they fit on that spectrum. And with respect to who owns it, you know, that really is dependent upon the organization, but primarily it's the legal department in coordination with IT and RIM. So that's legal, information technology, and records information management or information governance. Those three organizations really need to have a say in the process, but potentially legal through paralegals or attorneys will actually manage the daily operations of the process, and they'll coordinate with some parts of those processes that they cannot manage, like exporting mailboxes or ensuring data is preserved or ensuring data is copied or defensively copied in the right manner. They might have to coordinate those types of tasks with IT, and then tasks with records management related to ensuring that certain flags are maintained and the records management database matches what the legal department is doing. So the legal department kind of owns the process at a high level, but they have a very strict or tight coordination with several other departments.
Okay. What level of maturity are you seeing when you talk to companies in your day-to-day, Alon? Is there an average?
In my day-to-day, on average, we're seeing people at level 2. You know, people who have a repeatable process or somewhat repeatable, usually owned by one individual, and so that's not good because if that one individual leaves or is not around or something, it's harder for others to pick it up, but incredibly manual. And so majority, we're talking to people who are looking to create some beefiness at the defensibility side, but also to bring down the workload that a person has to do. We have some organizations, they spend hours and hours and hours a week doing essentially what is clerical work in order to ensure the process is maintained appropriately. And so we see most of the people we see is in level 2. We also talk to a number of people in level 3. Very rarely do we see people in level 4 and almost never in level 5. So I'd say primarily in 2, and then after that would be 3.
Excellent. ASHOC seems to indicate that the process is invented each time it's needed. Are you finding that as you talk to folks, that you have some companies who may be reinventing it each time they have a litigation hold?
We are seeing that. We don't see it as much as we were seeing it even, say, a year ago or 2 years ago. But we definitely do see that, and sometimes it's not as clear as just doing it differently every time. It's, you know, there are organizations that have, say, a legal department split into multiple areas, one that handles HR, one that handles M&A type work, one that handles litigation. And so a lot of times when it's ad hoc, we see different parts or different groups of the same division or the same department do it differently. So the HR folks will do it different than the commercial lit folks. And that can be very bad because we have seen opposing parties use that to their advantage and go in and do a 30B6 deposition or just ask the right questions early on to find out, wait a minute, if you're doing this differently every time or depending upon the different type of case, then how do we know that you're actually covering all the parts you have to cover? How do you know that that you're actually not missing things? And so it opens those organizations up potentially to having to talk about more parts of the process than they would need to normally.
Of course. Another really good question. If repeatable creeps in at level 2, at what level do predictable and demonstrable occur?
I think that that would be at level 4 and level 5. I think, predictable and demonstrable, which are terms used in other maturity models, which we chose not to use here, but definitely relate. I think those happen once you're at a more mature level. So that you can show predictability of process, you can show predictability of cost, you can demonstrate these things. Frankly, demonstration, i.e. being able to report on what you've done, at least from that example of demonstrative, you should really be able to do that at a level 2, definitely at a level 3. But I think that to the extent you're at a level 4, level 5, then those two things come kind of prima facie or just part and parcel of being at that maturity level.
Okay, I'm going to combine a couple because we have some very relatable ones to close out our program today, Alon. A couple of people have written in saying they're small companies and they're having a hard time convincing leadership that they need something beyond a manual process. So what would be the best way to convince other key players that they need to increase efficiencies, especially when they're looking at budget?
It's a great question. I think it's as simple as showing an ROI, and it's not that hard to do. It's, even if you're doing back of the envelope, it's how much, you start with how many times, how many holds do you do a year or a quarter or whatever you want to call it. Then you think about what are those holds, what do they kind of consist of? And then what do and then what are the clerical tasks associated with ensuring that those things happen correctly? And really get into detail as to, write those steps down. First I have to open Outlook, then I have to open Excel, then I have to do this, then I have to copy it here, then I have to check this, then I have to send an email. You will find that if you just write out your steps, which is really kind of an important part of getting to the higher levels anyway, you will see that there's a lot of steps that you take, and if you start associating that with time, and then you start to look at, okay, well, since it's manual, what am I potentially missing? And then you look at that and say, if we do miss something and it comes up even one time, what is the amount of money we're going to have to spend on outside counsel in order to clean it up? And you start doing this as effectively what is an ROI. And again, it could be back of the envelope. It doesn't have to be in any great detail. I think you will find just that alone makes it so that you can likely find even relatively expensive software out on the market that will create a lot of efficiencies. And so I would go as far as saying you build that list, you see how many hours you're spending across these holds, and then you look at what you're not doing. A lot of times these organizations that are smaller are only maybe managing the notification part, but they're ignoring everything else, and so they're actually not even going to gather documents until outside counsel says, okay, we've gotten to a point where now we actually have to get to discovery. And so that's even worse because now things may have been deleted and lost. And so if you just write these steps out, and then you compare it to, some of the more cost-effective, automated, web-based, or other solutions on the market, you'll see that likely right now, as of that day, you're already spending double or triple what you can. And so all of a sudden now you can go to the executives and say, look, this is how much money and time we're spending today. I'd like to bring in this software, this solution, or tune a few of these processes, and that will save us 20%, 50%, 80%. And so right there is hard numbers on savings. You're comparing mostly time savings, but time is money, and so I think that's really where you start. But I will challenge any company, regardless of how small or how large, to show that their manual processes are actually less expensive and more defensible than using some kind of automated system.
Thank you so much for your time today, Alon, and thank everyone who participated in our kickoff Knowledge Leadership webinar today. Look for us on the third Thursday of the month at this same time. You can find more information about our 2014 roster of programs at our website at the Education tab. That's www.biaprotect.com. Please remember to fill out the exit survey as you leave us today. And once again, we thank you for your valuable time.
Thank you, Robin. And thanks, everyone.